My name is Heather, and I'm 31 years old. At my father's retirement party, he stood at the podium, thanked 70 people by name, his secretary, the mailman, even the caterer, and when someone asked, "What about Heather?" he laughed into the microphone and said, "She's not worth mentioning." 70 colleagues watched. My mother looked at her lap. My brother drank his water. And something I'd held inside for 3 years, quietly, patiently, like a document waiting to be filed, clicked into place. I stood up, walked to the podium, and set down a folder. His boss opened it before he could. What she read changed everything. For him, for my brother, and for a bridge that 10,000 people cross every day. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. To a small town called Carver, and a little girl who kept taping certificates to a refrigerator that never wanted them. I grew up in Carver County, the kind of place where everyone knows your last name before they know your first. And in Carver, the name Anderson meant one thing. My father, Gerald, Director of Public Works, 35 years on the job. The man who approved every road, every drainage ditch, every sidewalk in town. He was important. Everyone told me so. My brother Kyle, 3 years older, was the proof. Dad brought Kyle to construction sites before he could tie his shoes. Introduced him at every county barbecue the same way. "This is my son. He'll carry on the family name." Kyle would beam, Dad would squeeze his shoulder, and I'd stand 2 steps behind, holding my own plate, waiting for my turn. My turn never came. I was good at math, loved physics, brought home honor roll certificates every semester like clockwork. I'd tape them to the refrigerator next to Kyle's football photos, his fishing trips with Dad, his first place ribbon from the county fair. By morning, my certificate would be gone. Not moved, gone. I asked my mother once. She said it must have fallen. It didn't fall. When I told my father I wanted to be an engineer, he didn't look up from the TV. When I showed him my geometry test, perfect score, he asked Kyle if practice went okay. One Thanksgiving, I was maybe 14, and I brought my science fair trophy to the table, set it right next to the turkey. Dad picked it up, read the inscription, and put it in the cabinet under the sink, where we kept the cleaning supplies. "Nobody cares about a piece of paper, Heather," he said. "Your brother actually does things." But I didn't give up. I thought if I tried hard enough, one day he'd finally see me. I was wrong, but wrong in a way I never could have imagined. Senior year, and I got accepted into state with a full ride, civil engineering. The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember because I stood in the kitchen holding it for 20 minutes, rehearsing how I'd tell Dad. He wasn't home. He was at Kyle's community football game. Not a tournament, not playoffs, just a Saturday league scrimmage that happened to fall on the same evening as my high school graduation ceremony. Kyle had a game that day. My mother called from the bleachers, voice low so Dad wouldn't hear. "Ma, you know how your father is," she whispered. I'd heard that sentence 100 times. It was her version of an apology, soft enough to say, empty enough to mean nothing. Dad paid for Kyle's college, private school, business administration. Kyle moved into a dorm with a mini fridge and a flat screen. I moved into a shared apartment off campus with 2 roommates and a hot plate. Scholarship covered tuition. Everything else, books, food, gas, came from the diner where I waited tables 4 nights a week. Nobody in my family mentioned my major. Not once. Not when I made the dean's list. Not when I got the undergraduate research grant. Not when I was named top of my class in structural analysis. But they mentioned Kyle's promotion. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every phone call. The Thanksgiving I graduated, 22 years old, magna cum laude, bachelor's in civil engineering. Dad carved the turkey and said, "Oh, an engineer? What, you gonna build bridges?" Then he laughed. Kyle laughed too. I smiled and passed the gravy. Funny thing is, he was right. I would build bridges. Or more precisely, I'd fix the one he nearly destroyed. After graduation, I moved to Ridgemont, 45 minutes east of Carver, far enough to breathe. I landed a junior position at Marsh & Callaway Engineering. Small firm, serious work. Bridges, overpasses, municipal infrastructure. My boss, Elaine Marsh, founding partner, 55, the kind of woman who could read a load calculation the way most people read a menu, saw something in me early. She mentored me, pushed me, made me present at client meetings when I wanted to hide behind spreadsheets. I passed my PE exam at 27. Professional engineer. In my field, that's the license that says you're trusted to stamp drawings that keep people alive. Bridges, hospitals, schools. Your signature means, if this fails, wow, it's on you. I was one of the youngest PEs in the firm's history. I called home to share the news. Dad picked up. I passed my PE, I said. Silence. Then, Kyle just got promoted. Kyle had been hired at Dad's department, project coordinator at the county public works office. No engineering degree required. Dad pulled strings. Everyone in Carver knew it. Nobody said it. I hung up the phone and sat in my car for 15 minutes, and for the first time, yes, I let myself think the thought I'd been dodging my whole life. It wasn't that I hadn't done enough. It was that he never wanted me to do anything at all. That same week, Elaine gave me a piece of advice I didn't fully understand yet. She said, "Keep a copy of everything you sign. Everything. Every drawing, every email, every revision. That's not paranoia. That's professionalism." I listened. I filed. I saved. I didn't know that 2 years later, that habit would change everything. 3 years before the retirement party, Carver County broke ground on the Millbrook Bridge. If you're not from around here, you need to understand what that bridge meant. Millbrook Road was the main artery connecting the north side of the county, 2 schools, the regional hospital, a senior living facility, to the highway. The old bridge was 60 years old, weight restricted, and groaning every time a school bus crossed it. Replacing it wasn't optional, it was survival. For Dad, but it was more than infrastructure. It was legacy, the biggest project of his 35-year career. He managed the timeline, the budget, the contractors. His name was on every press release. The county newsletter ran a photo of him in a hard hat, standing on the riverbank, arms crossed, grinning like a man who'd just been handed a trophy. Then the inspectors found the problem. The original structural design, done by Dad's in-house team, had a critical flaw in the load-bearing pylons. And under projected traffic weight plus seasonal flooding stress, the pylons would degrade within 5 years, maybe less. The engineering term is progressive failure. The everyday term is the bridge could collapse. Dad panicked. Not publicly. Gerald Anderson didn't panic publicly. But behind closed doors, I later learned, he paced his office for 3 days straight. If word got out that his signature project had a fatal design flaw before construction was even finished, his reputation was done. 35 years, erased. Margaret Holt, the county administrator, Dad's boss, ordered an outside consultant. Independent structural review, non-negotiable. "I don't need outsiders telling me how to do my job," Dad told his team. But Margaret Holt wasn't asking, and the outside firm the county hired was mine. Elaine called me into her office on a Wednesday. She had the contract spread out on her desk. County seal, scope of work, deadline. A structural review and redesign of the Millbrook Bridge load-bearing system. "You're my best on bridge structures," she said. "This one's yours." My stomach dropped. "That's my father's project." Elaine took off her reading glasses, looked at me the way she always did when she was about to say something I didn't want to hear. "Your job is the bridge, not your father's ego." She was right. I took the assignment. 2 weeks in, I realized the problem was worse than the initial report suggested. It wasn't just the pylons. The entire beam linkage system was underspecified. Wrong steel grade, insufficient cross-bracing, load paths that would funnel stress into exactly the wrong joints. If they'd built it as designed, that bridge would have been a countdown. I redesigned the entire load transfer system. 6 weeks, 14-hour days. I ran simulations until my eyes burned. Hell, I checked and rechecked every calculation until the numbers sang. The fix worked. The bridge would hold. When Dad found out his daughter was the consulting engineer, that I was the one who'd found his team's mistakes and rewritten their design, he didn't thank me. He called me on a Saturday night, voice tight as a wire. "You will not embarrass me," he said. "Fix it quietly, and your name stays off everything." Not a request, an order. At the same tone he'd used my whole life. The tone that said, "Sit down, be quiet, disappear." I fixed it, and I stayed quiet. That was my first mistake. The Millbrook Bridge opened on a bright October morning. The ribbon-cutting photos made the front page of the Carver County Gazette. Dad stood center frame, shaking hands with Margaret Holt, beaming. Behind him, the bridge gleamed, concrete and steel, clean lines stretching over the river. My design, his photo. Within a week, Dad erased me. Thus not figuratively, literally. He sent emails to the project office. Remove all references to external consultants from the Millbrook file. The official report credited the redesign to collaborative in-house engineering. My firm's name vanished. My PE stamp? Nowhere. But the worst part wasn't the erasure. The worst part was what he put in its place. Kyle signed the final engineering drawing submitted to the state. Kyle Anderson, supervising engineer. His signature, his printed name, right there on the PE certification line. Kyle, who had a business degree. Kyle, who couldn't tell a shear diagram from a shopping list. Kyle, who didn't hold a PE license because he'd never taken the exam, because he wasn't an engineer. In every state in this country, signing PE documents without a license is a violation of the State Engineering Practice Act. It's not a gray area, it's not a technicality, it's fraud. Fraud on a public safety document. I confronted Dad privately. It's just him and me, his kitchen, a Sunday afternoon. Dad, Kyle doesn't have a PE. That signature is illegal. He didn't blink. Mind your own business. Nobody asked you. So there it was, my choice. Speak up, destroy my family, send my father and brother into a legal nightmare. Stay quiet, become complicit in fraud on a bridge that school buses cross every morning. I chose silence. Because they were my family. Because I still believed that someday Dad would say thank you. 3 years passed. He never said thank you. He said something much worse, in front of 70 people. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering. You are cordially invited to celebrate 35 years of distinguished service. Gerald R. Anderson, Director of Public Works, Carver County. I held it for a long time. 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching Dad take credit for my work. 3 years of holidays where no one mentioned the bridge, and my career, or the fact that I existed in any professional capacity. And now, an invitation. My mother had called the week before. Your father would love to see you there, Donna said. Would he? I wasn't sure. But something in me, the same something that kept taping certificates to the refrigerator at 14, wanted to believe it. Maybe retirement would soften him. Maybe without the job, without the title, without the need to perform, he'd just be a father. My father. I drove 4 hours. Bought a new blazer. Charcoal, professional, the kind of thing you wear when you want to be taken seriously. I wrote a card by hand. Congratulations, Dad. 35 years is something to be proud of. Heather. I meant every word. On the passenger seat inside my work bag sat a manila folder. I didn't bring it as a weapon. I brought it the way you bring an umbrella when the forecast says 20% chance of rain, hoping you won't need it, knowing you might. 3 years of documents. Good drawings, emails, the state board letter, all originals, all verified, all sitting in that folder since the day Dad told me to mind my own business. I merged onto the highway toward Carver and told myself, tonight will be different. The folder stayed in the bag. I didn't know yet that by the end of the night, it wouldn't. The Carver County Community Hall looked like it was hosting a wedding. White tablecloths, centerpieces with little American flags and miniature hard hats. A cute touch. Someone's idea of a joke. A banner stretched across the back wall. 35 years of service, Gerald Anderson. Below it, a projector screen cycled through a slideshow of Dad's career. I stood in the doorway and watched the photos scroll. Dad shaking hands with the governor. Dad at a groundbreaking. Dad and Kyle at a county picnic, matching polo shirts, arms around each other. Dad and Kyle at the Millbrook site. Dad and Kyle at Christmas. 40 photos. I counted. Not one included me. There was a family photo. I remembered the day it was taken, Kyle's 16th birthday. I'd been standing on Dad's left side, but the version on the screen was cropped. I was gone. I found my seat at the back table, near the door. the table closest to the exit. I didn't think about what that meant until later. Mom spotted me from across the room. She waved, a small flutter of fingers, but didn't get up. Kyle sat at the head table with Dad, shaking hands with county officials. At his suit too tight across the shoulders, he looked like a man playing a part he'd been rehearsing his whole life. Dad saw me. Our eyes met across 60 feet of white tablecloth and candle flame. He gave me a nod, the kind you give a distant acquaintance at the grocery store. Quick, polite, forgettable. A woman at my table leaned over. "Are you Gerald's daughter?" I said, her eyebrows lifted. "Oh, he never mentioned you." He never mentioned me. I should have been used to it by now. But hearing it from a stranger, that hit different. Margaret Holt took the podium at 7:30 sharp. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of authority you feel before you see. She tapped the microphone twice. "Good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to honor a man who has shaped this county's infrastructure for 35 years. Under his leadership, we've seen the Millbrook Bridge, the Route 9 expansion, at the downtown drainage overhaul, projects that will outlast all of us." She smiled. "Please join me in welcoming Gerald Anderson." Applause filled the room. Dad rose from the head table, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the podium like he'd been walking to podiums his whole life. Confident, measured, in control. He started with a joke about potholes. People laughed. Then he got serious. "I want to thank some people." My heart beat a little faster. He thanked Donna first. "My rock. I've 40 years of putting up with late nights and muddy boots." Mom dabbed her eyes. The room clapped. He thanked Kyle. "My son, the future of this family. I'm proud to say he's carrying on right where I left off." Kyle stood briefly. More applause. He thanked Janet, his secretary for 22 years. "She organized my life better than I ever could." He thanked Bill the mailman. The caterer, by first name, Rosa. The night security guard, Pete. The guy who fixed the copier. And each name was a stone, and I sat at the back table, sinking. He paused, scanned the room, smiled. "I think I've thanked everyone who matters." He set the microphone down, and from somewhere in the back row, a voice I didn't recognize, someone called out, "What about Heather?" 70 people turned to look at my father, and my father, microphone still warm in his hand, laughed. He picked the microphone back up, casual, like someone had asked about the weather. That he looked toward my table, not at me, toward me the way you glance at furniture, and said it. "She's not worth mentioning." 4 words, a microphone, 70 witnesses. The room didn't gasp. That only happens in movies. What actually happened was worse. Silence. The specific kind of silence where everyone looks down at their plates at the same time. Forks stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Someone coughed. Mom lowered her head. I could see her hands folded in her lap, as squeezing each other white. Kyle. I watched him. He didn't flinch, didn't turn around. He picked up his water glass and drank. Like nothing had happened, like his sister hadn't just been erased in front of every professional contact their father ever had. 70 people heard it. Not one said a word. And in that silence, I understood something I'd been circling for 31 years. Their silence wasn't agreement. But it also wasn't protection. It was nothing. Now, and nothing, when you needed someone to stand up, was the same as siding with him. 3 years. 3 years I'd kept that folder in my desk drawer. 3 years of waiting for him to call, to acknowledge, to say the 2 words that would have made everything different. And his answer, broadcast through a PA system to every engineer, contractor, and county official in Carver, was not worth mentioning. Something shifted inside me. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. Yet the kind of clarity that doesn't burn. It focuses, like a lens pulling light into a single sharp point. I looked down at my bag. The folder was inside. It had been inside for 3 years. Not anymore. I stood up. The chair scraped against the hardwood, a sound louder than it should have been, or maybe the room was just that quiet. Mom reached for my arm. Her fingers closed around my wrist, gently, the way she always did, as if gentleness made up for everything she never said. Sit down, honey. Don't make a scene." I looked at her hand, then at her face, and for the first time in my life, I didn't do what she asked. "I'm not making a scene, Mom. I'm just not sitting down anymore. I pulled my wrist free. Not roughly. Slowly. The way you set something down that you've been carrying too long. I reached into my bag and took out the folder. Manila. Ordinary. The kind you buy in a 10-pack at the office supply store. It weighed almost nothing in my hand. Yeah, but it held 3 years of silence. Every drawing, every email, every piece of proof that I existed in the story my father had spent his career rewriting. I walked between the tables. Left side, right side, white cloth and candlelight, and 70 pairs of eyes tracking me like I was crossing a courtroom. My heels clicked on the hardwood, steady, even, one step at a time. I could hear Elaine's voice in my head, but from a conversation months ago when I'd almost shredded the whole thing. The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be placed where it belongs. Dad stood at the podium, microphone still in his hand, and as I got closer, 5 tables away, then 3, then 1, I saw something on his face I'd never seen before. He looked afraid. I stepped onto the riser, stood beside him, and said, quietly, so he had to lean in, 7 words. Before I leave, there's one thing Dad forgot to mention. My voice carried. Not because I raised it, because the room was so silent that a whisper would have echoed. Dad's jaw tightened. Heather, sit down. Low, through his teeth. A command, not a request. I didn't sit down. I placed the folder on the podium, gently, the way you lay down a hand of cards, and turned to the front table. Mrs. Holt, I said, this concerns the Millbrook Bridge project. As county administrator, I believe you should see this. Margaret Holt had been watching the whole exchange with the kind of expression that comes from 30 years in public administration, composed, assessing, giving away nothing. But when I said Millbrook, something behind her eyes sharpened. She stood, walked to the podium, reached for the folder. Dad's hand shot out. He grabbed the edge. That's personal. Margaret didn't flinch. She held his gaze the way you'd hold a door. Firm, final. If it concerns a county project, it's not personal, Gerald. She took the folder, opened it. The first page, my structural drawings, PE stamp, and signature in the lower right corner, caught the overhead light. She turned to page 2, the emails. I watched her eyes move left to right, her lips pressed together. Page 3, Kyle's signature on the state filing. Supervising engineer. She looked up, and I'll never forget this. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Dad. She looked at Kyle. And in that moment I thought, was this the right thing to do? 3 years I held this. 3 years I chose family over truth. If you'd been standing where I was, holding proof, watching your father laugh at your existence in front of 70 people, would you have opened the folder, or would you have walked away? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Margaret turned another page, then another. Then she looked up at my father. And every trace of celebration drained from the room like water from a cracked glass. Dad snatched the folder from Margaret's hands. Papers scattered. 2 sheets slid off the podium and drifted to the floor like leaves. This is a family matter. His voice cracked on the word family. I'd never heard that before. Margaret's tone dropped 10 degrees. Gerald, those are county engineering documents with signatures I need to verify. Hand it back. He didn't. Instead, he turned to the room. 70 faces, some stunned, some confused, most very still, and did what Gerald Anderson had always done best. He performed. His shoulders softened, his chin dipped. When he spoke, his voice had the careful tremor of a man who's been wounded. Folks, I'm sorry about this. He shook his head slowly. My daughter has always had issues. She's been estranged from the family for years. We've tried everything. He looked at me with a sadness so practiced it almost felt real. She's been troubled for years. We've tried everything. And it worked, for about 5 seconds. I saw it ripple through the room. A few sympathetic nods. A woman near the front clutched her napkin. Someone whispered, "How sad." Dad was good at this. He could rewrite a room in 30 seconds. I'd watched him do it my entire childhood, reshaping every story, every situation, until he was the hero and I was the problem. But this time, Margaret Holt was holding 3 pages of county documents. And documents don't respond to tone of voice. Margaret knelt, picked up the fallen sheets, and straightened them against the podium. "Gerald," she said, not unkindly, "I'm going to need these back." Dad's performance faltered. Because Margaret wasn't looking at him with sympathy. She was looking at him the way an auditor looks at a discrepancy. That Margaret took the folder back. This time, Dad didn't resist. She read methodically. No drama. Just a woman doing her job at a speed that made the room hold its breath. First, my structural drawings. PE stamp number 47,832. My signature, Heather M. Anderson, PE, in clean black ink. Then, the emails, 7 of them. All from Gerald's county address to the project office. She read one line aloud. Not for theater. I think she couldn't help it. Remove all references to external consultants from the Millbrook file. She looked up. You told the board the redesign was done in-house. Dad's chin lifted. It was a team effort. Margaret turned the page. The state filing. The PE certification document submitted to the State Department of Transportation. Kyle's signature. Kyle's printed name. The line that read Supervising Engineer, PE license number, and next to it, a number. A number that didn't exist in any state registry. Margaret stared at the page for a long time. Then she turned to Kyle. He was still at the head table, napkin in his lap, looking like a man watching his own car slide off a cliff in slow motion. "Kyle," Margaret said, calm as a doctor reading test results. "Do you hold a PE license?" The room shifted. Engineers in the audience, and there were several, sat up straighter. They knew what that question meant. Kyle's mouth opened. His eyes went to Dad, the reflex of a lifetime, the automatic search for someone to answer for him. But Dad was frozen at the podium, mic in hand, no script, no rehearsal. For the first time in my memory, Gerald Anderson had nothing to say. Kyle was on his own. Kyle's voice came out thin, stripped of the confident handshake tone he'd been using all evening. "Dad told me to sign. I didn't know it was a problem." The whisper that moved through the room wasn't surprise. It was recognition. 70 people doing the math at the same time. Engineers, contractors, county officials. Every one of them understood what a PE signature meant, and every one of them understood what it meant when someone signed without one. Margaret turned back to Dad. "Gerald, you were project manager? You supervised Kyle's involvement?" Dad straightened, tried to recover. "He was supervised. I supervised him." Margaret didn't blink. "You're a project manager, Gerald. You don't hold a PE either." Silence, but a different kind now. And not the awkward silence of a family squabble. This was the silence of people realizing they were watching something official, something with consequences. This wasn't a daughter making a scene at her father's party. This was a county engineering matter unfolding in real time. Mom stood. Her chair squealed against the floor. Her voice shook. "Can we please not do this here?" Every head turned to me, waiting. Yeah, and I said the thing I'd been holding for 3 years. The reason the folder existed at all. "I tried doing this privately 3 years ago, Mom. Dad told me to mind my own business." Mom sat back down, slowly, like the air had left her. Dad gripped the podium with both hands. His knuckles were white, his face was red, and when he spoke, the microphone caught every word. "This is my retirement party. Not a courtroom." But Margaret Holt was already sliding the documents back into the folder. Carefully, completely, the way you handle evidence. That's when Dad broke character. He turned on me. Full rotation, shoulders squared, microphone forgotten in his fist. His voice was raw. No performance, no audience management. Just 31 years of something ugly finally reaching the surface. "I gave you a roof. I gave you food. And this is how you repay me?" The room flinched. Not at the words, at the tone. This was the Gerald Anderson nobody in this room had ever seen. The private one. The one who spoke behind closed doors, in kitchens, in hallways. The one only his family knew. I didn't step back. I didn't raise my voice. "You gave me a roof, Dad, but you never gave me a seat at the table. Not even tonight." Something shifted in the room. I could feel it. A change in gravity. A few people at the side tables nodded. Small movements, almost involuntary. From Janet, Dad's secretary of 22 years, sitting 3 tables away, pulled a tissue from her purse and pressed it to her eyes. Dad looked around the room, searching, scanning, looking for an ally, a sympathetic face, someone to back his version of the story. No one met his eyes. Kyle stared at the tablecloth. Mom's face was buried in her hands. The county officials at the front table studied their plates like they were reading blueprints. Margaret Holt closed the folder, then tucked it under her arm, and said, with the precision of a woman who had run this county for 12 years, "Gerald, I'll need to review this with legal on Monday. I suggest you enjoy the rest of your evening." Everyone understood. The party was over. Janet caught my arm as I stepped down from the riser. Her hand was warm, her eyes were wet. "I always wondered who really fixed that bridge. Let me tell you what was in that folder. All of it." But first, the structural redesign drawings for the Millbrook Bridge load transfer system, 23 pages, every one of them bearing my PE stamp, number 47,832, and my signature. Heather M. Anderson, PE. These were the drawings that replaced the flawed original design, the ones that ensured the bridge could carry school buses and ambulances and 18-wheelers for the next 100 years. Second, 7 emails from Gerald Anderson's county email account to the Carver County Project Office, and each one a variation of the same directive. Remove Marsh and Callaway Engineering from the project record. Remove external consultant references. Credit the redesign to in-house collaboration. In one email, dated 3 days after the bridge opened, he wrote, and I'll never forget the phrasing, "Clean this up, I don't want any loose ends." I was a loose end. Third, a formal letter from the State Board of Professional Engineers, addressed to me by name, recognizing my exceptional structural analysis contributing to the safety of the Millbrook Bridge. The board had sent it after reviewing the revised design as part of their routine post-construction audit. Dad never knew about this letter, because he never asked. Fourth, the internal audit results I'd obtained through a public records request. Freedom of Information Act, perfectly legal. And those results showed that Kyle Anderson had signed PE-certified documents on 3 separate occasions without holding a PE license. A clear violation of the State Engineering Practice Act. I didn't bring that folder to the party for revenge. I brought it because 3 years ago, my father told me to mind my own business. Tonight, he told 70 people I wasn't worth mentioning, and I decided, if he wouldn't tell the truth, the documents would. "Beck, a PE stamp isn't a formality," I said to no one and everyone. "It means a licensed engineer takes legal responsibility for public safety." Kyle didn't have that authority. Dad knew. After Margaret closed the folder, she turned to me. Not with pity, not with gratitude, with something rarer, professional respect. "Ms. Anderson," she said, "I wish I'd known this 3 years ago." Ms. Anderson, not Heather, not Gerald's daughter. Ms. Anderson, the way you address a colleague. But it was the first time anyone in that room had spoken my name like it carried weight of its own, separate from my father's. The ripple started slow. Tom Reeves, senior engineer in Dad's department, 30 years on the job, the kind of man who speaks only when he has something worth saying, pushed back his chair and walked over. He extended his hand. "The load transfer redesign," he said. "That was yours?" I shook his hand. "Yes." He held it an extra second. That was brilliant work." Behind him, 2 more engineers stood. One of them, a woman I didn't know, maybe 40, county ID badge on her lapel, said quietly, "I reviewed those drawings last year for the maintenance assessment. The shear wall integration was, I wondered who'd done it." Dad stood at the podium, microphone still in his hand. But the room had rotated, like a planet shifting its axis, and he was no longer at the center. No one looked at him. Kyle sat frozen, white-faced, his water glass untouched, sweating a ring onto the tablecloth. Mom pulled at my sleeve from behind. When had she walked over? Her voice was thin. "Please, let's just go home." I turned to her. My mother, the woman who'd spent 40 years translating Dad's cruelty into something softer, something survivable. "You know how your father is." I said, "I am going home, Mom. My home." And I meant it in every way a sentence can be meant. I picked up my bag from the back table. The blazer I'd bought for tonight, charcoal, professional, chosen with care, felt like armor now. I walked toward the exit. Steady. Not fast. Not slow. The way you leave a place you're never coming back to. Dad caught me at the door. He must have come off the riser fast, because he was slightly out of breath. His hand closed around my elbow. Not hard, but firm enough to stop me. If you walk out that door, you're not my daughter anymore. The hallway was empty. But the main doors were open, and half the room could hear us. He knew. He wanted them to hear. One last attempt to make me the villain. I turned to face him. My father, 63 years old, 35 years of public service, a career built on the careful management of what people believed about him. I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his eyes. Dad, I said, I've been not your daughter my whole life. Tonight's the first time you said it out loud. His hand dropped. And I don't know what I expected, a retort, a denial, an explosion. But what I got was nothing. Gerald Anderson, the man who always had a speech, a redirect, a reframe, stood in the doorway of the Carver County Community Hall with nothing left to say. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. The night air was cool. October. Crickets. The parking lot half full, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My phone vibrated before I reached my car. Found a text from a number I didn't recognize. Margaret Holt. Can we meet Monday? There are things I need to discuss with you, professionally. I got in my car, turned the key, and drove. The highway was empty. 4 hours of dark road, white lines, the occasional pair of headlights coming from the other direction. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone, just drove. I thought I'd feel satisfied. The word revenge suggests something that tastes good, sweet, or at least sharp. But what I felt driving home that night wasn't satisfaction. It was emptiness. Not the bad kind, the clean kind. Like walking through a room you've finally finished clearing out after years of stepping around the mess. Around the 2-hour mark, I called Elaine. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it, really thought. Like I finally handed in the last report. She laughed, soft, knowing. At the laugh of a woman who had seen enough in 55 years to understand that some victories don't feel like victories. They feel like the end of something you didn't realize had been exhausting you. You didn't burn the bridge, Heather, she said. You just proved who actually built it. I smiled. First time in hours. The miles scrolled by. I thought about Dad's face when Margaret opened the folder, about Kyle's silence, about Mom's hand on my wrist. Sit down. At honey. And the 20 years of sit down, honey that had come before it. I thought about what Dad said. Not worth mentioning. And I realized maybe he was right. Not in the way he meant it, but in a different way. I didn't need to be mentioned. My work spoke for itself. It had always spoken for itself. I'd just been waiting for the wrong person to listen. I got home at 1 a.m, set my bag on the counter. It was lighter now. The folder was gone. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. At Margaret Holt's office on the 3rd floor of the Carver County Administrative Building. She had the folder open on her desk. Next to it, a legal pad with 2 pages of notes already filled in her sharp handwriting. A cup of coffee sat untouched, which told me this meeting had started before I arrived. Sit down, Ms. Anderson. I sat. Margaret didn't waste time. The state board letter? This is authentic? You can call them directly. My license number is on record. She made a note. Ed then looked up. Not as a boss, not as an investigator, as a person. Why didn't you come forward earlier? The honest answer was the only answer I had. He's my father. I thought he'd eventually do the right thing. Margaret nodded, slowly, the kind of nod that says I understand more than you think. I've referred the file to the county attorney's office, she said. They'll review the PE signature issue and the email directives. I've also requested a comprehensive audit of all engineering filings from the past 10 years under Gerald's department. 10 years. Every project Dad had touched. Kyle, she continued, has been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. He was notified this morning. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not guilt. Not exactly. More like the weight of knowing that a thing you set in motion has its own momentum now. You can start an avalanche. You can't steer it. So Margaret called the state board that afternoon. They confirmed my PE status, confirmed the recognition letter, and opened a preliminary inquiry into Kyle's unlicensed signatures. A formal investigation would follow. The wheels were turning, and they didn't need me to push them anymore. 3 things happened in the 2 weeks after the party. First, the county canceled Gerald's formal recognition ceremony, the one scheduled for next month. And with the plaque and the framed resolution and the photo with the county board, Margaret's office released a one-line statement. The ceremony has been postponed pending an internal review. In a town like Carver, that sentence was a grenade. Second, the bronze plaque at the Millbrook Bridge, the one that read, "Dedicated to Gerald R. Anderson, Director of Public Works," was removed for updating. Everyone in town drove past that empty space on the bridge rail and knew exactly what it meant. And third, the county board scheduled a public hearing on engineering document procedures, open to the public. Agenda Item 1, PE certification compliance in county infrastructure projects. Dad was retired. He couldn't be fired. But the thing he valued more than any paycheck, his legacy, his name, the story of Gerald Anderson that the whole county had accepted as truth for 35 years, was being rewritten in real time. He called me on a Wednesday night. I almost didn't answer. You destroyed this family." His voice was flat. No performance, no audience, just him. "No, Dad. You built a family where only one child counted. I just stopped pretending I was okay with it." He hung up. Mom called an hour later. "Your father can't sleep, he's devastated." I closed my eyes. "I couldn't sleep for 3 years, Mom. Did anyone call to ask about me?" Silence. The long kind. The kind where you can hear someone realizing that the answer is no, and that no is enough. She said, "I'll talk to you later, honey." She didn't call back for a month. Kyle called on a Saturday, late afternoon. The sun was going down outside my apartment window, and I was doing what I always did on Saturdays, reviewing drawings, drinking cold coffee, pretending the silence didn't bother me. His name on the screen made me pause. Kyle and I hadn't spoken directly, without Dad as moderator, in years. "Hey." His voice was smaller than I remembered. The conference room confidence was gone. "Oh, hey." Long pause. I could hear him breathing. "Did you have to do it in front of everyone?" I set my coffee down. "You watched him say I wasn't worth mentioning, in front of everyone." Another silence. I let it sit. I'd spent my whole life filling silences for other people, smoothing, accommodating, making it easier for everyone but myself. Not anymore. "I didn't know the PE thing was that serious," he finally said. "I know." That was it. I didn't accuse him, didn't lecture. I just confirmed what we both understood. Kyle hadn't known, because Dad had never told him, because Dad needed Kyle to sign without asking questions. "Kyle, hire your own attorney. Not Dad's, yours." "Why?" "Because Dad's attorney is going to protect Dad. You need someone who protects you." More silence. Then very quietly, "I'm sorry I never stood up for you." I looked out the window. The streetlight had come on. "I know that too." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time thinking. If Dad had treated us equally, if Kyle had never been handed a role he wasn't qualified for, if I'd never been erased from the record, would any of this have happened? I don't think so. Dad didn't just harm me, he harmed Kyle too, just in a different way. Do you think Kyle deserves consequences? Or is he another casualty of Gerald's control? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Carver is a small town. By the end of the week, everybody knew. Not the full story. Small towns don't deal in full stories. They deal in fragments, in whispered versions, in the sentence you overhear at the hardware store. But the fragments were enough. The local paper ran it first. Front page, below the fold. County reviews engineering records after retirement party revelations. No names in the headline, but the article mentioned a former department head and irregularities in PE certification documents. In Carver, that was as good as a billboard. Within a month, the ripples reached every corner of Dad's world. The Rotary Club, where he'd been a member for 20 years, where he sat at the head table every monthly dinner, sent a letter, politely worded, carefully phrased. The gist: perhaps it would be best if he took a step back from active participation until the matter was resolved. Neighbors stopped waving. Not all of them, but enough. the ones who mattered to Dad, the ones whose waves he counted like currency. Then Kyle received formal notification from the State Board of Professional Engineers, an official investigation into unlicensed practice. If the board found a violation, the penalties could include fines and a permanent record. And while Kyle had never actually been an engineer, that signature on official state documents was as real as concrete. Mom called one more time. Her voice had a new edge. Not anger at me, but something close to surrender. Are you happy now? I thought about it, honestly. No, Mom, I'm not happy, but I'm honest. And for the first time, so is everyone else. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something she'd never said before. I should have spoken up years ago. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Margaret Holt called Elaine in November. I was at my desk when Elaine walked in, leaned against the doorframe, and smiled. The specific smile she reserves for good news she's been holding for at least an hour. The county just signed a 3-year retainer with us, she said. Infrastructure consulting. Bridges, drainage systems, road specifications, the whole portfolio. I looked up from my screen. That's great. Guess who they requested as lead engineer? I didn't need to guess. The retainer was official. My name, my real name, attached to my real credentials, would be on every Carver County infrastructure project going forward. Not hidden, not erased, not credited to someone else. Mine. And a week later, I drove past the Millbrook Bridge and noticed the plaque had been replaced. The new one read, Millbrook Bridge, Carver County, Structural Redesign, Marsh & Callaway Engineering. No individual names. But in my industry, the firm credit was enough. Anyone who looked it up would find the project file. And in the project file, they'd find me. Tom Reeves, the senior engineer from Dad's department, sent me an email that evening. No subject line, just one paragraph. Ms. Anderson. I reviewed your Millbrook redesign in detail during the audit last week. The shear wall integration, the load path redistribution, the pylon reinforcement sequence. It's some of the best structural work I've seen in 30 years. The county is lucky to have you on retainer. Tom. I read it 3 times. Then I printed it out and put it in my desk drawer. Not because I needed proof, but because sometimes, after 31 years of silence, it's nice to have the words on paper. And just to know they're real. 6 months later, Dad was not arrested, not charged, not dragged before a court. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways, worse. The county attorney concluded that Gerald's actions, directing the removal of consultant records and facilitating unlicensed PE signatures, were administrative violations, not criminal ones. He was already retired. There was no employment action to take. And the county issued a formal reprimand for the record and referred Kyle's case to the state board for independent adjudication. But the real punishment, the one that mattered in a place like Carver, was the redefinition. Gerald Anderson's 35-year story was no longer the one he'd written. The bridge that was supposed to be his crowning achievement now had someone else's firm on the plaque. The hearing transcripts were public record. And the newspaper clipped them and filed them in the archive at the Carver County Library, right next to 35 years of flattering press releases. Kyle told me, in one of our occasional text exchanges, that Dad stayed home most days now. Didn't go to the diner for coffee, didn't walk the dog past the county building anymore. He watched TV. He read the paper. He didn't mention me. Mom sent a letter. Handwritten, on stationery I remembered from childhood, pale blue, and her initials embossed at the top. I know I was wrong to stay quiet. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know, I see you. I always saw you. I was just too afraid to say it. I read it at my kitchen table, and I cried. Not because it fixed anything, it didn't, but because after 31 years, my mother finally said the thing I'd been waiting to hear from the wrong parent. It wasn't an ending, but it was a door, barely open, letting in a thin line of light. Now I drove to the Millbrook Bridge on a Tuesday morning. No reason, just wanted to see it. It was early, 7:15, the sky still pink at the edges. A school bus crossed going north, then a delivery truck, then a woman in a minivan with 2 car seats in the back. The bridge held. It didn't groan, it didn't flex. It carried them the way a bridge is supposed to, silently, invisibly, without asking for recognition. Nobody on that bus knew my name. Yet nobody in that truck had any idea who redesigned the load transfer system or spent 6 weeks running simulations until the numbers worked. They didn't need to know. They just needed the bridge to hold, and it held. I stood on the walkway and looked down at the river. The water was low, early spring, snowmelt still a few weeks away. The pylons I'd redesigned rose out of the riverbed like quiet sentinels. I don't tell this story so you'll think my father is a monster. He's not. He's a man. A man who grew up believing daughters don't build things, and who spent his whole life making sure that belief didn't get challenged. He was wrong, but he was human. And there's a difference between understanding someone and accepting what they did to you. I don't need him to call. I spent 31 years waiting for a phone call that was never coming, and the waiting was its own kind of prison. I'm done waiting. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. You choose who walks through. You choose when. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight. It's to set down the truth, quietly, in front of the people who need to see it, and let it do the rest. Here's where I am now. Lead engineer at Marsh & Callaway. The county retainer keeps me busy. 3 projects in the pipeline, 2 more in review. Elaine keeps threatening to make me a partner. I keep telling her to give me another year. My apartment is the same one. Small. Second floor, nothing fancy. My car still has 140,000 miles on it, but on the wall above my desk, framed, centered, lit by the window, is my PE certificate. First time I've ever hung it up. It seems like a small thing. It's not. Mom and I talk once a month. Short calls, light topics, weather, neighborhood gossip, the new bakery on Main Street. We don't talk about Dad. We don't talk about the party. But we talk. And there's a boundary now. Clear, gentle, real, that we both respect. Dad doesn't call. I don't expect him to. Some silences aren't punishments. They're answers. And I've learned to accept the answer. Kyle texts sometimes. Simple stuff. Hey, how are you? No exclamation marks, no emojis, just checking in. He hired his own attorney, cooperated with the state board, and, for the first time in his life, started figuring out who he was without Dad directing the show. Last I heard, he was taking night classes. I didn't ask in what, but I was glad. I don't have a Hollywood ending. Nobody showed up at my door with flowers and an apology. Nobody made a grand speech about how wrong they'd been. The family didn't gather around a table and cry and hug and promise to do better. But I have something I never had before. Peace. The quiet, sturdy kind. The kind that holds weight. If you're listening to this and you've stayed this long, which tells me something about you, I want to say one thing. Not as advice. And not as a lesson. Just as something I wish someone had told me a long time ago. If you are in a family where your silence is mistaken for agreement, you are allowed to speak. Not with shouting. Not with cruelty. With truth. Simple, documented, undeniable truth. And if you are carrying a folder, literal or otherwise, you don't have to open it. But you deserve to know that it's yours. That it exists. That the proof of who you are and what you've done is real. And even if the people closest to you refuse to see it. I drive across the Millbrook Bridge every morning on my way to work. Every single morning. And every time I feel the road beneath my tires. Smooth, solid, holding steady. And I know 2 things. The bridge stands. And so do I. Thank you for staying until the end. If you've ever kept quiet longer than you should have, or if you're still deciding whether to speak, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please hit like and subscribe. It's the best way to help other people find it. People who might be sitting at their own back table right now, waiting to be mentioned. And if you want to hear what happened next, because there is a next, I've left a link in the description to another story you might recognize yourself in. Click it when you're ready. I'll be here. Heather.